Here we go. Rich Larson here from Watermark Learning, and the August IIBA certification chat is underway. I want to welcome you all to the chat, and if you haven't been in one of these before, we rely on the GoToWebinar toolbar for you to submit your questions to me, and then I'll read them out loud to the group. And then if you have follow-up questions, shoot them on in. Sometimes I'll even ask you for a follow-up because I need more information or to clarify something, so please check that out. So no questions in so far. So as you can see these slides crawling in front of you, we have a short deck of brief information about certifications, and you can download that as a handout, which is available in the GoToWebinar panel. It should be. Hopefully, if you don't see it there, we always follow up with copies of handouts anyway. So let me know if you cannot see it there, and I'll make sure that we follow up with that. We always also have a recording of these on file. Check out our website afterwards to listen to it and to share with anyone and everyone who wants to know more about IIBA certifications. And so that goes up usually within the same day. So check back later. If you have to leave early or you miss part of it, that you can always catch up as well. So IIBA certifications, if we look at our little slide deck here, we have 3 basic types, level 1, 2, and 3, as they call them. The ECBA, CCBA, and CBAP. CBAPs are the most popular. Almost 10,000 CBAPs exist in the world, and over 1,000 ECBAs and over 1,000, about 1,300 CCBAs. If you're curious about the numbers, IIBA publishes them on their website. And I'm always curious too about the people in attendance, and so I'm going to release a poll and ask you which poll or which certification are you the most interested in. So let's see, launch. Here we go. Launching poll right now. So the poll's open for you to weigh in, and if you could please just check which of the certifications you're most interested in. That's always good feedback for me as we go through the chats, as I can focus my extra emphasis on what you're interested in. So again, to remind you, and for those of you who just joined, a couple of just got on, that we rely on the GoToWebinar question panel for you to submit your questions in to me, and then I read them out loud from your written questions and share them with the whole group. So far, 100% of you have voted, so I'm going to close the poll. 83% of you are CBAP, and the rest are CCBA. I'm going to share the poll now. There we go. You can see that as normally these chats go, about roughly 80 or more % of the people are interested in CBAP. So I'll focus my energies on there. So is anybody interested in the application requirements? If so, shoot me in a note through the chat and I can talk to you about applying, because I always have good tips on that. This slide deck has the high-level requirements, and maybe you're already familiar with that if you've downloaded the certification handbook, which I always advise people to get a hold of. It's pretty short. You should read through it and take a look at it. We also have on our website an application worksheet that helps you organize your project hours. And oh, hey Carolyn, thank you for weighing in. The project hours requires you to have 7,500 of them as in business analysis, regardless of your title. So having done work as a BA or even as a project manager, or even like I used to be many years ago, programmer analyst, some of those hours are spent doing business analysis work, and that's really what counts. And so our worksheet helps you organize those. That's probably the most daunting requirement of applying for the CBAP, is to demonstrate you've had those 7,500 hours over the last 10 years. You need also to have 900 hours in specific knowledge areas. There are 6 knowledge areas you have to be familiar with, and for that you rely on the BA body of knowledge for more information. And if you're not familiar with these knowledge areas, or KAs for short, that you need to at least glance through the BA body of knowledge, or the BABAC for short, to get a hold of that. So you need at least 4 of the different KAs out of the 6, and 900 hours to demonstrate that you've had a broader experience than, say, just focusing on eliciting requirements, let's say, or documenting them. So that's why they require that. And you also have to have some professional development hours, 35 to be exact, and that's not the same as PDUs or CDUs. Professional development hours literally means training, and so you need to have some kind of business analysis training within the last 4 years, 35 hours of them. And for example, most CBAP boot camps, but not all, but most, like ours, has 35 hours to let you accumulate them if you haven't had that training. So that's something that can help you get over the hump if you haven't had those formal training hours. If your company's provided that, then check with them and get a certificate of completion. Or if you've gone to a vendor like Watermark Learning or other vendors, we provide those certificates. Make sure you get a hold of that so that in case you're audited, you can produce proof. Now, for the project hours, the way IIBA audits is to check with your contacts and to ask them, hey, did Carolyn or did Rich or whatever actually do this work at this time as a business analyst or doing business analysis work? I know I was audited and they did check with my contacts. You also have to have 2 references. What makes this different from some other certifications, like namely PMIs, is you need references who can vouch for your work as, I keep saying as a BA, but as you do business analysis work. So, and you need to get those submitted first. And I always recommend to people to get those references done first, because they're the critical path. Your application can't be complete until your references weigh in. And it's fairly easy for them, but you know how people are. They're busy and they're getting an email from IIBA out of hundreds of emails they get. And so besides getting it done early, make sure you brief your references that they're going to get this email and that they're going to have to complete a little survey on you. So Carolyn follows up with a question: does study group through IIBA count as professional development? Study groups can count if they're handled in the right way. And by that I mean the 2 important requirements are, is there a person facilitating each group versus just a group of like-minded people studying together? Is somebody actually facilitating? You need some interaction with a instructor or facilitator. And number 2, you have to have some kind of work. So for instance, in a normal, say, a BA fundamentals class, you have to do some workshops and have an instructor verify that you actually completed some work. Or in the case of a study group, if your study group does it the right way, you will turn in some assignments. Usually involves practice questions. So most study groups rely on doing practice tests and other ancillary kinds of work, but the practice exams are probably the most beneficial to demonstrate that you've actually completed something. So I hope that answers the question, Carolyn. And I'd be curious if your study group is organized that way, and which study group are you in, just out of curiosity. So study groups are a great way to learn, and depending on your time and your learning preferences, they're one of the, I'd say, the 3 major ways of studying. So study groups, kind of informal, they're spread over time, gives you time to absorb and interact with people, to reflect and think about things. A second way is independent study, so that you would read the BABAC, maybe buy a study guide, get online practice questions and do that, and then go and take the exam. The third way is to attend a class, do a boot camp or some other kind of class to help you prepare. Those are the 3 main ways. So Carolyn's asking, does the final paper for the lean count lean continuous certification? Did I read that right? Lean continuous certification count? Yeah, final paper would count. I'm not sure what the lean classes you're talking about, because it has to be really focused on business analysis, and IIBA will reject things such as if you take a Six Sigma class. That's not close enough to business analysis work in their mind to actually count as a BA class. So I'd be curious more about that, about what class it was that you took or are taking. But yeah, so send back any questions, whether it's that, or I'm going to launch another poll, and I'm curious as well, how far along are you in the process? So let me launch that poll. How long are you in? Are you just looking into it like you are today? Are you applying, maybe like Carolyn is doing or thinking of? Application done, studying hard, or my exam is soon? Sometimes people come to these chats and their exam is next week, and it's a great last minute thing to check in. Feel free to do that, guys. We do these every month. We've been doing it for several years. And you can check in when you're in need of some questions like this. Like 60% of you, 50% are just looking into it. That's great to focus in on what kinds of things are of interest to you. And most of you have weighed in, so I'm going to close the poll now, and I'm going to share it. Okie dokie. So half of you are looking into it, 17% applying, and 30% of your applications are done, ready to study. So I'm going to hide that poll. And if you're just looking into it, then you are also curious maybe about which certification is right for you. Part of the process, of course, is the exam. My slide tends to want to animate itself. So these different levels have different kinds of exams. And here we're listing the different knowledge areas as well as some other subject areas from the BA body of knowledge. And you need to really be familiar with the BABAC in order to successfully pass the exam. You can't rely on your own knowledge and experience and expect to pass unless you're a really, really good test taker. And most people aren't. I don't know about you, when I first took my certification exam for the PMP, it had been years, basically since college, since I took any rigorous exam in a proctored kind of environment with a lot of pressure on me. And so basically, you can't really rely on your test taking abilities and to fake it. And so the reason I bring up the BABAC is really all exams are based on that. You can see here the percentage of questions from the different exams, and we could focus in on the CBAP if you'd like, but there's a nice round mixture of anywhere from 14 or 12 to 30% of the questions. And of course, requirements analysis and design are very much the big part of it. So there's a pretty even distribution for the most part of questions on your exam from the different knowledge areas. So you really have to know them. So Carolyn says, my answer would have been studying first and will apply once you're ready. That makes sense too. I think the application, of course, is part of your critical path to getting your certification. And I think a little bit of study up front, reading the BABAC makes some sense, and then apply. But the thing is, if you wait too long to apply, if you're ready to take the exam, let's say in October, just to take a month out of the year, you really should be applying now, because it could take you longer than you think. IIBA is pretty good about turning your application around once you apply. They used to say they needed 3 weeks, but they've really improved on that. And often it's a matter of just some days for them to review it. So you need to understand, once you have gotten your application approved, that you have a year to take your exam, and then you really want to prepare in earnest. I mentioned those 3 different ways of studying, all of 3 of which involve the BABAC in some way. If you're in a study group, I really think those study groups should focus on the different knowledge areas and different chapters of the BABAC, and break your study group down into multiple sections based on each chapter of the BABAC. Likewise, if you're doing self-study, same thing. and focus in on taking exam questions and then going into the BABAC and studying more. Or like in a class, we really ground you in the different ways of learning the BABAC. You're not going to come out of a boot camp knowing it 100% ready to take the exam the next day. Instead, it's a great way to prepare to understand it in your mind so that it makes the rest of your studying that much easier. And of course, taking more and more and more practice questions. Jennifer, hello. Your question is, most of the simulation test available is around knowing definitions of terms. The actual test is really focused on scenarios. When you say most of the simulation tests, when you say from us or in general, how do you study for that? Well, a couple things. First of all, knowing what the terms are. Oh, thanks. Knowing what the terms are important. Our exam simulator is designed to help you learn the BABAC and really master it so that you could answer any question that's thrown at you. Number two, when you take simulations, I'm surprised that you say that because we have, I don't know how many simulations now, about 4 simulations every time you take a simulation. Not my simulation, 4 scenarios. Case studies, as they're also called. There's scenarios and case study questions. So we mix them in. So we have a number of them. Whenever you take a simulation, if you take a drill, we drill you just on the BABAC and understanding it. We don't tend to throw too many situations and no case studies into the drills. So when you are done drilling and feeling like you're absorbing the BABAC in the different knowledge areas, and I would definitely go through each knowledge area at least once and take at least one drill before you start doing simulations. You will have an easier time answering those case study and situation questions. Jennifer, shoot me back another question of that if you'd like more on that. But I do think that focusing in on the BABAC is your best defense for passing the exam. That way you learn the terminology they use. You can, as you're learning it, you can relate it to your experience. And Kim's saying she's considering a prep class this month. And we help you kind of relate your experience to BABAC terms, in part because we use our study guide that we wrote that does that. So if you're considering taking our prep class, I hope, Kim, you don't have to complete the application before. I didn't answer the question before, so don't worry about that. But I think I would complete the application shortly after you take the class. And I say that because I do encourage people to sit for the exam 3 to 6 months afterwards. So you have like a little over a week to get into our class. It starts a week from Monday. And so if you're considering it, I'd sign up now, but I don't think you need to get that application done. You should be thinking about it. And I encourage everybody to go out to our website, if you haven't done so already, to get the application worksheet. The slide deck that you have available to you, let me see if I can find that, has some links in it built into the slide deck. And then here's a list of different interesting and useful other links, including the link to getting at the application worksheet that's in the 1, 2, 3, 4th row down. So what a prep class will do for you, Kim, and everyone else, is to really break through the BA body of knowledge and understand it and begin you on that path of relating it to your own experience. Because when you take the exam, you have to answer questions based on what the BABAC says. And I know that sounds kind of stilted, but I think there's a reason for that, and I can get back to that if you'd like. But the thing that trips people up more often than not is answering a question based on your own experience. And we, in our practice questions, will put in distractor answers that will sound reasonable and maybe even use some jargon you might use on the job, but are not correct because the BABAC either doesn't mention it or doesn't prescribe it, or it's way too practical an answer for it to be a BABAC-like answer. And a group like IIBA or PMI for that matter, or any testing body, has to use industry standard best practices, or at least accepted practices, that they'll test you on, because they can't test you on the way you do things at your company, of course, you know that. So the only next best thing they can do is test you on the agreed on terms that have, it took years to put together BABAC version 3. I know as part of the committee, I wrote 2 of the chapters along with other people. And so I understand what it takes to put together a work like that. So it is vetted, it is approved, it is reviewed. It took a long time for people to review and then work through comments on the review. So it does stand some scrutiny in terms of how people are using business analysis around the world. So I can, pretty much vouch for that. Now, if you're getting ready to study, here's some tips that, let me go back, some tips for you for thinking about organizing your study. One thought is that our survey shows that people on average spend about 100 hours to prepare for the CBAP to pass it. And that may be over preparation, but some people spend even more. But I think what this tells us is that the people that responded to our surveys, that used generally our products and services to help them get certified, really spent that much time. If you take a prep class, that reduces that by the 35 hours. So that counts towards that, I think, in terms of how much time you need to allocate in the whole scheme of things. So, we also recommend you read the BABAC at least once. And many people find our study guide helpful for making the BABAC understandable and relating it to real world examples and so forth. Go through a chapter at a time and then do practice drill questions. So we have a study exam that lets you drill on those. And if you keep getting less than 80%, keep on practicing. Finish all the BABAC sections and then do simulations. Our tip number 6 is to move on to those, like I said earlier, after you've done drilling on each of the knowledge areas. And if you aren't getting 80% on any knowledge area, go back to step 3 and keep through that cycle until you're really roughly ready to pass. It's a recommended threshold, and you don't need to get that score on the real exam, but we want to over prepare you. And lastly, when you get ready for your exam, get plenty of rest. Don't do any last minute cramming. We always suggest a brain dump at the exam start to relieve your test anxiety. You're given a whiteboard when you go into that exam booth, and so you can write down some key points that you've committed to memory. The main purpose of which is to get yourself mentally ready. It's not necessarily something you'll refer to, but plenty of people say they refer back to their notes that they've written down. So I do think it serves a secondary purpose. And number 10, when you go into your exam, one of the important things is don't feel like you have to answer them in order. Skip over any difficult questions. Go all the way through the 120 questions and then go back and relook at the questions you skipped over. And there's a lot of good reasons for that. Test anxiety being one of them, but also it prevents you from dwelling for like 5 or 10 minutes on one really difficult question. And I do think examiners like IIBA will front load difficult questions at the end to trip people up and to challenge you. So skip over them. I had one woman said she spent 20 minutes on question number 1 when she took her exam a couple of years ago. That's just, it's heartbreaking to think that she spent that much time on that one question when you've got 119 other questions now to have to answer in, you have 3.5 hours is all. So skip over them. You can flag them in the exam software and then come back and answer them later, or I think you should also be able to go through them. Yes, the time limit, Kim and everyone else, is 3.5 hours. So the clock starts once you go into your exam booth. You get to go through a tutorial, and when you're ready to start the exam, then the timer ticks down. And if you have to go to the bathroom or step out for a minute to stretch or whatever, that the clock keeps ticking. So yeah, 3.5 hours. Now, if you've done your 100 hours of preparation, generally speaking, most people tell us they don't need all that time, right? So if you undershoot your prep hours and maybe only spend 20 or 30 hours preparing, you'll probably either need to take all that time or you'll just race through and hope for the best. So generally speaking, most successful candidates don't need the full amount of time. But I'd plan on at least, 2.5, 3 hours in the exam booth. And me, I'm a kind of deliberate test taker. I used most of the time allotted to me when I took my exams, because that's just the way I operate. And so some people will race through quicker. I had one guy tell me who failed his exam, and we started talking about his approach. And he said he looked at each question. Instead of reading the question, he went right to the answers, and he picked what sounded like the best answer. And I get, what? I mean, basically admitted not to reading the question. Well, that's just not a good strategy. So you can get through an exam faster that way, but that's not the point, is it? You want to really understand each question and not get too hung up on each one. Like I said, just skip it over and come back to it. So, gosh, what are the questions you guys have? What's on your mind here in terms of your preparation, your interest, your challenges so far? We had a lot of questions on the application, which is fine. I don't mind answering any under the sun, anything that you are just thinking about right now that you'd like to know. Any inside secrets about anything, whatever I can reveal. I mean, I don't really know that many inside secrets. I'm just kind of more joking on that, but I do have more tips I can share with you about, test taking or studying or whatever. Your challenge is to count my hours. So Carolyn, to that point, again, you would do yourself well to go get our application worksheet, and that will walk you through. Now, IIBA is not going to challenge you if you say I worked 60 hours on elicitation on project XYZ. They're going to take your word for it, so you can do your best guess, okay? So just do your best guess. Plug the numbers into our spreadsheet, and it'll tally the hours for you as you go, so you know when you've got enough. Kim is asking, do we get the results instantly? Yes, you do. Now, I don't know about their newest exam, the IIBA-AAC. I think that's when they launch a new exam, they tend to wait until they get enough of a critical mass. But all the other exams that are in place, you'll get an instant result. So, of course, then, when you press done and you wait for your results, that's when, the anxiety builds up. But, it's better to get the results right away, isn't it? I think so. I had to wait to get my results for my CBAP when I took it, but people now are able to get them right away. Once you get your CBAP or any certification, you can renew it without taking another exam. That's the good news, or without applying. What you have to do is provide 60 CDUs every 3 years in order to keep your certification active. So whether that is going to webinars or IIBA chapter meetings, conferences, training classes, reading, presenting it at a chapter meeting, a lot of things that are available. And I know it's a little premature to talk about recertification, but I think I want to alleviate that. Sometimes people ask me the question, do you have to take the exam again to recertify? And fortunately, the good news is no. Once you make it, you can just keep those CDUs submitted to IIBA, and they'll keep renewing you. I had at least one person that let her CBAP lapse, and she wanted to get it again, so she had to do it. So that's kind of rare, but definitely want to watch out for that. Okay, we have 1 minute left for any last questions. So who has any last questions before we end up this chat session? Any other tips, advice, any gotchas? anything under the sun. I would also urge you to go to our website. We have other webinars about CBAP, and we have a resources section where we have some other resources that actually a couple places you can get that worksheet. One of them is the resources section. So look for our website, our menu, resources, and look for CBAP resources. So I don't see any other questions in. It's 11:30, so I'm going to call it a day. And thank you guys for attending and your questions. And I always say best wishes on getting your certification. I never say good luck. I'm a little superstitious, so I won't say that. So thank you everybody for attending, and come back next month for the next edition of this if you're interested still. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.